have people coming in. We still have people coming in. We'll give them just a few more minutes before I give my introductory remarks, and then we begin the presentation this evening. Thank you for your patience. Good evening, everybody. We still have people coming in, so we will, but we will go ahead and get started. I'll deliver the introductory remarks, and then I'll turn over the presentation to Mr. Kevin Shaar. Hello, my name is Jeannie Novishchuk, and I'm the Executive Director for the Regional Association of West Quebecers. Thank you for joining us this evening at our community information session on Bill 96. This evening, Mr. Kevin Shaar, the Vice President of QCGN, will be delivering a presentation on Bill 96. Following his remarks, we'll hear commentary by Mike Duggan, Gatineau City Councillor, as well as Madeleine Lawler, President of Y4Y Quebec, and Kevin as well regarding what the implications of Bill 96 may be. The final portion of our evening will be a question and answer period. We will begin with a few questions that were pre-submitted, and then we'll open the floor to the evening's participants. I would like to make a note that we will be recording this session, and it will be available on our YouTube channel afterwards. If you do not, you can choose to turn off your video for the duration of the session if you don't want your face to be shared in that medium. We appreciate your participation tonight and hope to have a healthy discussion and dialogue regarding what Bill 96 could mean to the English-speaking community. We hope that you'll help us make sure that in the chat and during our discussion period that we remain civil and we have a good dialogue within our community. If you have any questions that don't get answered this evening, we'll be sure to try to follow up with you, and our contact information and a follow-up email will be sent out to all the evening's participants so that they can, if they would like more information, that they know how to get a hold of us. Thank you again, and at this time, I'll turn over the floor to Mr. Kevin Shaar.
You're on mute.
Thank you. Thanks for the introduction, and thank you for having me here this evening. So one of the challenges the QCGN has been having in both understanding Bill 96 and being able to communicate publicly or to the media or to even politicians that are supposed to be in the know is the complexity of this piece of legislation. To put it, it's simply a monster that does several different things at several different levels. And it requires a bird's eye view to understand how these different pieces work together. So that's the challenge I have tonight in explaining the different components to you. And that's the challenge we're having as a community organization in trying to get people's attention to the aspects of the bill that are potentially harmful to our community. Now, a few things before we move on to the presentation of the bill. The QCGN as an organization, has to be said, we are fully in favor of the protection of the French language. That it's our point of view that the current charter of the French language in its current state achieves this objective, that a reasonable balance has been obtained over the years. It's not the same bill that it was introduced in 1977, and it has been successful in protecting the French language in Quebec. So the question, if this is the case, the question remains then is, how did we get here? How did we get to a situation where the government felt that something as drastic and as far-reaching as Bill 96 was required, and has the public's support to introduce such measures? If you remember, it wasn't that long ago that the Quebec or media essentially did a sting on St. Catherine Street West in a lingerie store and found one clerk who had a student job during the COVID crisis, when it was difficult to find employment, that had difficulty responding to a question in French. Hardly the language crisis that would require the modification of what has been considered one of the most important acts in Quebec society. But nonetheless, that's what occurred. And even still, the statistics for the use of French, even in Montreal, where the problem is claimed to arise, are good. The use of French is on the rise. The language of work doesn't seem to be an issue. People generally, I'd say more than generally, well, people are able to obtain services, but the Anglicization of Montreal is a very, very powerful political tool. And there's one statistic that is often referred to, particularly by certain media pundits, and that is the mother tongue. While the use of French has increased, the statistic of French as a mother tongue has decreased. This could be expected in Quebec, like the rest of Canada. Its growth depends on immigration. There is not enough Francophone immigration, even though it's favored in Quebec, to meet the numbers that are required. So one can anticipate that the mother tongue statistic would decrease slightly. Now, this shouldn't be a problem, because the purpose of Bill 101 has always been that the language of public use was French. Immigrant children, as those of you in education are aware, are directed to the French schools. They have no access to the English language schools or the schools run by English language school boards. So while this means that the immigrants that arrive might not necessarily speak French upon arrival, their children have gone through the French system and are able to function, work, operate in French, and use French as la langue publique. Now, what hasn't happened, and I call this the sugar Sammy effect, and this is perhaps what's causing the alarm with this statistic, is these children don't necessarily become Francophones. They become multilingual. They're often fluent in their language, original language. They're fluent in French. They're fluent in English, and it can often move through the three seamlessly and without accent. Why am I going in this long way around to get to this legislation? I think it's important to understand this, to understand the legislation. It's important to have this background, because this legislation is not about the English community. It has nefarious effects on our community, but it's not really about the English community. It's about integrating newcomers into Quebec society. The the QCGN met with Minister Jolin Barrette just before the release of the act to express our concerns. There were several leaks in the media, and much of what was to be contained in the act was already known. So about a week prior to its release, we met with Minister Jolin Barrette, and the question or the proposition was put to them that some of these things would be detrimental to our community. And his answer was very straight, and I believe he was genuine, that he didn't feel that there was going to be any negative effect, or that he actually stated that there was no negative effect on our community and we had nothing to worry about. And then I explained, well, that's what you said about Bill 40, eliminating our school boards, and we're in court to protect our constitutional right to manage our own schools. That's what we were told about municipal mergers, and we lost municipal services under Bill 101 with municipal mergers because we fell below that point, that 50% mark required under the bill to maintain language services, or services, municipal services in English. And so I said, what have you done to ensure that there won't be any secondary effects on our community? His answer was the same. There are no concerns for the English language community. And the reason he can say this, and this is part of the what I feel is scary about the bill. And I'll go back to the first point. You have to understand, this is not about the English community. And it's because they define the English community as, and we've heard the media use this term a lot recently, as historical Anglophones. Now, no one's going to say what a historical Anglophone is. I don't know what the cutoff date is. I don't know how you define a historical Anglophone. But this is an important theme in understanding what this bill tries to do. And the reason there's this belief amongst the powers that be that we are not affected is because they're looking at what they believe is the historical Anglophone community and say that, well, you have your services, you have your education, you have your schools, you will continue to have that. This bill is aimed at those new arrivals that want to be, that the powers that be want to integrate into Francophone society. And the second point you have to understand, so that's the first point. The second point that is required to understand where this bill is coming from is that I talked about the objective in integrating newcomers into French society. Is in the second aspect is every part of Quebec society is seen as a tool of integration. And that's what you really have to understand to know what this bill is doing, whether it's education, health services, the public service, services from businesses, labor relations, everything is seen as a means of integrating newcomers into French society. So those are the two things that you really have to understand and grasp what this bill is trying to do. You're going to have to keep those two things in mind because it's prevalent throughout the various aspects of the bill. Now, I mentioned that this is an extremely complicated bill. So I'm going to try to stick to the script. And I apologize when I give this type of presentation. I don't want to, it's boring to listen to, some guy from the QCGN talk like a lawyer and through his Zoom for the next 20 minutes. But I'm going to try to summarize this to the big parts or the most affected areas, and then so that be the first part of my presentation will be an overview of the bill. And in the second part, I'll really try to talk about how the bill can potentially impact the English speaking of Quebec. So, like I said, it is an extremely complex bill and wide ranging. There is constitutional impacts, both by unilateral change to the Constitution, as well as an impact on constitutional rights by the use of the Notwithstanding Clause. There is alterations to the justice system and the ability to access justice for the English language community. There is changes to the public sector, the way services are to be delivered, professional orders as well. There are changes to commerce and labor relations, changes to education, major changes to the state apparatus. And finally, I've always been told that you're supposed to say something positive first, but I think the only positive thing about this bill will be mentioned last, and that's certain guarantees for French instruction that hopefully our English language schools that are offering immersion courses will benefit from additional funding, as well as a new role for Quebec in the Francophonie, which I will say a few words about at the end. So if we look at some of the key aspects of the bill, starting with the constitutional changes, the bill proposes a unilateral amendment to the Constitutional Act of 1867. Now that recognizes Quebec's first form of nation, that French shall be the only official language of Quebec, and French is also the common language of the Quebec nation. Now this on its own, and I mentioned again that this is a complex bill with very many moving parts, might not seem that off. We all know that Quebec is French. The Harper government declared Quebec a nation several years ago. And we know that French, Bill 101 has made French the common language of Quebec since at least 1977 in legal terms. So on its own, again, and I'm going to ask you to be patient, we're going to get there, doesn't seem to really do anything different. And I can tell you as a lawyer that the courts have treated, Chart of the French language, Bill 101, excuse me if I interchange the terms, but has already basically treated this as a quasi-constitutional or a constitutional act. So on its own, doesn't add much. What else it does is there's sweeping overrides of both the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms and the Quebec Charter of Human Rights and Freedoms. So this is for the entire bill. So that's what we've referred to as the Notwithstanding Clause. And they've done it not just for the Canadian Charter, but for the Quebec Charter as well. And so what it does is it creates this charter-free zone of application. And normally what would happen is, for example, if we look at, most of you will remember the sign law fights through the 70s and 80s and use of the Notwithstanding Clause at that time. So the original Bill 101 excluded any kind of English from public commercial signs. That was challenged in court. The court went up to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court said it was a violation of the right to freedom of expression. The government of the day invoked the Notwithstanding Clause, which is only good for 4 years. So French signs remain unilingual. Eventually it expired and was not renewed. And today we have English on signs as long as French is predominant. So that's normally just an example of how the Notwithstanding Clause works, is you will wait for a court decision to find a violation, and then you will, with some kind of precision, notwithstanding that decision, the law is going to continue to apply. That's not what they've done here. What they've done here is preemptively shielded this entire law or act and the existing Bill 101, the provisions that will remain unchanged, from any kind of constitutional challenge, preemptively. So that court never gets to play that protective role of ensuring that the legislation is consistent with our fundamental rights. They've taken that away from the start. So that is, they've word for word what they've done with Bill 21. They use the exact same formula. And it is the first time that such a sweeping, well, these two acts are the first time that such a sweeping use of the Notwithstanding Clause has been seen in Canadian legislation. We'll come back to that. So there's also a suite of amendments to key provisions of other fundamental provincial statutes. So this doesn't just alter Bill 101. It also alters 24 other statutes, regulations, and as I mentioned, as well as the Constitution of Quebec. So it also alters the Civil Code of Quebec, the Code of Civil Procedure, and the Interpretation Act. And that's all to like I said, there's a reordering of the Quebec legal order, which will again, I'll get to, I'm getting ahead of myself, so I'll get to in maybe just a minute. Now, there's also, from a constitutional perspective, a bit of a constitution grab. So they are trying to, they're attempting to apply the Charter of the French language to any enterprise or employer carrying out its activities in Quebec. So this seemingly seems to apply a territorial notion of jurisdiction. So it would apply to federally regulated enterprises like banks or telecommunication companies that are under federal jurisdiction and aren't usually subject to the Charter of the French language. So there is a jurisdiction grab here, which is in my view, clearly unconstitutional. Changes to the justice system. Now, there are new requirements for legal persons and litigants to attach a certified French translations to any pleadings drawn up in English at the litigant's expense. So if you have to provide, for example, 2 factums, one in English and one in French, why would you bother appearing before the court in English at all? Never mind the additional expense that would cause. For judgments, there's a new requirement for certain judgments rendered in English to be immediately accompanied by a French version. There is already a delay to have certain decisions come out in English. And now if it were to come out in English, it would have to be accompanied by a French version, causing additional delay. Bilingual judges. And this again was a spat between the Minister Joly Barrette and the Chief Justice of the Superior Court of Quebec. We have a constitutional right to appear in the language of our choice before the courts of Quebec and Canada. There's also certain provisions of the Criminal Code that guarantee language rights. So now there's a new requirement for the Minister of Justice and the Minister of the French language, which is also a new position, to approve any requirements for a judge or adjudicator to have working knowledge of a language other than French. So getting rid of this discretion that used to belong to the Chief Justice of the court to determine the court's needs, it's now for the minister to determine the needs of the court when it comes to language. Changes to the public sector, services from the public sector and professional orders. So there's a new overriding obligation for the civil administration to use French in what is called an exemplary manner. This essentially entails the exclusive use of French in written or oral communications with the civil administration and with the public, except in defined and permitted situations. So the reach of this obligation is potentially very broad, as the bill also expands the definition of civil administration. Again, this is something we saw with Bill 21 to include teachers, healthcare workers, police forces, etc. Now, what those defined and permitted situations are remain to be seen, because that will be defined by a language policy, which is the responsibility of the minister and the government and not part of the legislation. So that is my next point, which is the language policy of the state. So the Minister of the French language, which again is a new position created in government, will develop a language policy of the state, will further define the use of French and the permitted use of English, with the possibility of narrowing the use of English beyond what is permitted in the current Charter of French language. Now, currently services that can be delivered in English there's a distinction between non-recognized agencies. So those are the default. A non-recognized agency is for non-recognized agencies, and then there's recognized agencies, which are the bilingual bodies. So for non-recognized agencies, there's a narrowing of the ability of members of the public to communicate with these agencies in English. And for some recognized bodies, which includes some municipalities, an ability to depart from the obligation to use French in an exemplary manner is permitted. Again, though, this depends on the yet to be written policy by the Minister of French language. Changes to municipalities. There's a change in the process for withdrawing a recognized bilingual status for municipalities. So as I mentioned, the Act provides a 50% threshold. That means 50% of the population has to speak English for the municipality to provide English services. There are some places that have been grandfathered since the municipal mergers. But this bill provides yet another way for that status to be lost. It doesn't provide any way for that status to be gained. It provides only another way for that status to be lost, and that's the recognition will be withdrawn unless the municipality itself adopts a resolution to maintain the recognition. And once it's gone, it's gone. There's no legal mechanism for it to return. There are changes to the rules of professional orders to somewhat restrict the use of English by those professional orders. Commerce and labor relations. Signage. So there's a change to, they didn't invoke the notwithstanding clause as was done in the past to make sure that French only be used on signs. The rule of predominance still applies. English can still remain on signs, but they've limited the use of registered trademarks to be accompanied by markedly predominant, as is the case now with other sign laws. Franchisation of business. So there's significant changes to the requirements of franchisation programs. So the franchisation program, for none of us know, applies to businesses that are over 50 employees. It comes with a series of obligations. I don't think we have the time to go through it today, but that requirement has been lowered to businesses of 25 employees or more. It strengthens the role of franchisation committees in those businesses, increases the role of the Office Québécois de langue française in monitoring franchisation programs, and provides for new penalties for non-compliance. Services. There's a new requirement that all consumers have the right to be served in French. Although the hello bonjour is still allowed, that hasn't been ruled out yet. A further new requirement that business offering services to the public other than consumers must serve them in French as well. This is just a reiteration or a clarification of, I think, the service obligations that existed under the current Act. In terms of labor relations, there's more specificity around when an employer must communicate with employees in French. There's a new requirement that employer must make all reasonable means or take all reasonable means to avoid imposing a requirement for knowledge of a language other than French in hiring and promotion. There's an expanded protection against discipline or reprisal regarding language requirements and regarding disclosures to the office. So it now becomes the obligation of the employer to justify with evidence why they would have to hire, why there would be a requirement for the position other than speaking French. Changes to education. As those of you in the education system or working in the education system know, there is a strict admissibility criteria into an English language school system. You have to have a parent either educated in English in Canada or a sibling in English in Canada. But there are some humanitarian exceptions, as well as those that are in Quebec on a temporary basis. In our region, we see that a lot because we are close to national defense and there's lots of military personnel and families that move around the country. So they often benefit from the exemption provided for military personnel to be able to send their children to English schools despite not otherwise meeting the criteria. This now has a 3-year limit. So a child in this case, assuming that they're there for more than 3 years, would not be able to finish their grade school or secondary school within the same school. And after the 3 years expire, would have to go to a French school. There is a and this is perhaps one of the positive things I should mention about the bill, there is a substantive rights for students attending English language schools to receive instruction that will enable the student to interact, participate, and thrive within Quebec society. I feel that our immersion programs have already done this, and it's my hope, but again, it remains to be seen that creating this substantive right for what we would call second language instruction should come with a price tag and some funding, because at the current state, the English schools are now offering education in 2 languages at the same price that the French schools are offering 1. CEGEPs, and we've heard a little bit talk about this because it is in the media and one of the easier things to understand about the bill. But there's a new designation of college institutions as either French language or English language institutions. This is something we've seen in our grade schools and high schools. It's now being extended to the CEGEPs. And is moving into health services, which I'll get before, but this is part of the mise en garde that I said at the beginning of my presentation. So there's an enrollment cap for English language institutions, with English eligible students be given priority in CEGEP admission policy. So this is introducing the notion of English eligible students that we haven't seen before at the CEGEP level. So new language of instruction requirements at both English and French language institutions. Language policies at CEGEP and university. Added requirements for college and university language policies. Differentiate again between English language and French language institutions, something that we didn't have in the law prior to this bill. Changes to the state apparatus. Again, I'd mentioned it before, it's the language policy of the state. The main component of implementation within the civil administration is the language policy of the state. So the bill contemplates far-reaching, comprehensive, and mandatory language policy developed by the minister. The policy applies to government departments, government bodies, municipal bodies, and parliamentary institutions. Individual agencies must then develop directives based on this policy and must also be approved by the minister. The policy we expect its purpose will be to narrow the use of English beyond what is permitted currently under the Charter of the French language. So there will also be a new minister and ministry of the French language, a new minister of the French language and associated ministry responsible for the promotion of the French language and the administration of the entire Charter of French language. The minister may make regulations to restrict the option to use a language other than French in certain circumstances, according to the bill. Francisation Quebec, another new agency for French instruction. It'll be part of or housed within the Ministère de l'Immigration, de la Francisation et de l'Intégration. There will also be expanded mission and greatly expanded powers of investigation and search and an expanded reporting role for the l'Office québécois de la langue française. The bill creates also a new French language commissioner with monitoring, investigating, and a reporting role. And of course, there will be new provisions and sanctions. While there's currently 9 penal provisions in the Charter of French language, the bill adds some 25 new civil sanctions, administrative penalties, and penal provisions. By no means a small change from the point of view of the state apparatus. Now, well, again, one of perhaps I alluded to at the beginning, the 2 positive aspects of this bill is a new right to receive French language instruction in both within and outside the school system, and basically a position statement that the bill positions Quebec as a leader within the Canadian international francophonie, and includes a number of new measures to Quebec role in this respect, to promote Quebec's role in this respect. Now, Quebec has for a long part, or for several years now, somewhat ignored the francophonie outside of Quebec. So this is a part of positive change in that regard. But again, more of a policy statement than an obligation. I see that this is taking much longer than I thought, so I'll try to get right to it. Okay, so I've alluded to many of it before, so it might seem like I'm hurrying through this, but I want to give everyone the opportunity to comment, and there are other speakers. But like I said, this bill is a massive undertaking, and it's a massive undertaking to try to explain it in some comprehensive form. So as I've alluded to before, what this bill does is, and right now I'm just going to deal quickly with I think the potential impacts on our community are. And that's, I've alluded to this again, is the expanded use of an English eligible concept, right? So it originated in English primary and secondary instruction, and now it's been expanded into two areas. One, to English CGIPs, to give admission priority to students who are English eligible, and a new requirement for many civil administration agencies to communicate in writing in English only with the persons who are declared English eligible. So how are they going to make that distinction in the civil administration remains to be seen, and is most likely going to be set out in the state language policy. Second, access to justice and the right to use English in courts. Again, I've already spoken to this. It was going to increase the cost of the use of English courts. It's going to increase delays in receiving judgments, and even delays to be able to hear before an English-speaking judge. In the end, it will probably result in litigants avoiding using English in the Quebec courts. Primary, secondary schools. Looked at the new restrictions. This could add again to the decline in enrollment in some of our English schools. SAGEPs. For the first time, SAGEPs will be designated by language. The impact of the enrollment caps for English CGIPs is not known. It may be different from institution to institution. Services. The new rules and yet to be real language policy state will introduce complicated constraints on when an agency can communicate with the public and therefore offer services in the English language. Many municipalities will lose their bilingual status if they don't proactively pass a resolution to maintain it. As far as language of work and employment, there's also the possibility that the establishment of French language in both the public and private sectors, and it should point out that already we make up, depending on who you talk to, 7 to 9% of the Quebec population and less than 1% of the public civil service. So it's already an area that our community has been excluded from on the employment front. And the concern is that extending or tightening the obligations in the private sector will have a similar chilling effect on our employability. Now I can go on about the larger picture and how all these pieces interrelate. There's somewhat of a reorganization of the legal order in Quebec around the unilateral constitutional amendment that they're making in the modification of those 24 other statutes other than the Charter of French Language. But it's extremely complicated, and the documents are accessible on the QCGN's website. So I think I will try to put an end to my presentation here and give you all a break. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kevin. At this time, I'll turn it over to Maddie Lawler for some comments. She's here as the president of Y4Y Quebec, and if she would like to offer comments, she'll be followed by Mr. Mike Duggan. All right, it looks like there's just a short or a computer malfunction. Mike, if Mike is there, I'll invite him to speak, and we'll get Maddie back in just a second.
Here I am. Okay, is my volume working? Can you hear me?
Yes, we hear you
Check,
well.
check. Okay. Well, thank you. Thanks for having me, Jean. I'm not a specialist on this subject matter in particular, so thankfully Mr. Shaar is there. But I have a lot of experiential knowledge and observations as an Anglophone politician here in the Outaouais, some of which I will share with you. But first, a quick background. I'm from North Bay in Ontario, a city about 25% Francophone. I was educated from kindergarten to grade 8 entirely in French and then continued in English. My bilingualism has helped me through my education and professional careers. I've lived abroad in Japan for a total of about 4 years, which is another example of what I consider to be a kind of a xenophobic nationalism, where there are a lot of media and power establishment expressions of cultural concerns over the preservation of language and culture, though they're an island nation, so they have an obvious barrier to protect what they feel they need protecting, majority-wise. We settled in Quebec in 2001 because Aylmer reminded me of my hometown with a healthy balance of language and culture, though instead of being in the 75% Anglophone majority in North Bay, I'm in the 25% Anglophone minority here in the western part of Gatineau. After a 12-year career in the public service, I'm currently on year 8 of a political career, which has seen a certain success at the municipal level. I've come to understand and accept the aspects of Bill 101. Our children were educated in the French system from kindergarten to the end of high school, though all 3 decided to go to English cégep for reasons of inclusiveness, and because all 3 chose technical fields where English is the working language, and their generation is not competing within the city or the country, they're competing globally for jobs and working opportunities. So it seems to me that Bill 101 is sufficient, and I'm very alarmed at this, what I see as a creeping authoritarianism, which seeks to try to make the whole population conform to, exclusively French-speaking, official state atheism by virtue of the Quebec Charter of Values. And we see now currently with all the pandemic restrictions, Quebec was one of the most restrictive. We've essentially been a police state since March 2020. So just as my perspective as a politician and somebody who's involved in a lot of the social dynamics, there are a lot of red flags going up with the Legault regime, which is enjoying a populist majority and really pushing the limits, in my opinion. Unfortunately, coupled with this are the opposition parties at the Assemblée, which seem to be ineffective, silent, absent. As much as I like André Fortin, his party has been very silent, and they're the official opposition. And I wish he were here tonight. He's not. So the only party that's currently speaking out is the Conservative Party of Quebec, which only has 1 seat. So when you're that small, you can take risks. And under Éric Duhaime, they are doing so. We'll see what the impacts of that are. So something to follow. The memberships are selling like hotcakes right now for that party, because there is a critical mass of citizens who recognize that what's happening here in Quebec is not healthy for our population in the medium or long term. So some of the problems that I encounter as a politician in governance at the municipal level, and the municipalities are completely controlled by the province in our system. For example, at the federal level, there's official bilingualism. It does not apply in the province. Quebec is unilingual French, and the municipalities likewise. So except for those who have a certain mass of Anglophones, the magic number being currently 50%, I believe. So some of the problems I recognize here at municipal governance are, well, we've got an aging population. Sorry, I'm just going to mute for a second while we have an aging population here that was educated before Bill 101 took hold. So in my thinking, it's not their fault they don't speak French. It wasn't pushed, it wasn't promoted before Bill 101. And they're losing access to services, municipal information, access to healthcare. We hear anecdotes sometimes. Not all the cases are bad, but the ones that are bad, we hear a lot about them in the media, and it's something to monitor. These changes that we see It's encouraging those who are nationalist minded. I hear anecdotes of citizens calling Gatineau's 311 line and asking for information in English. You know, they're taxpayers who maybe English is the first language, and being immediately told, almost as though it's a script, saying, this is Quebec and Bill 101, we are not obliged to provide services in English. So saying that to a tax-paying client is kind of rude, but there's this kind of creeping nationalism that I notice popping up. Another negative effect is Anglophone poverty. The food banks and the areas of town which are less nice. You know, there's hints of the formation of Anglophone ghettos where the youth who are not capable of speaking French do not have access to employment opportunities that suit their abilities because of, for whatever reason, if their parents or the education system didn't encourage them to learn French. And if, as I mentioned, we've got this continued authoritarianism, which is highly inefficient, and it can only lead to social chaos and upheaval. And I have a pretty strong confidence in the Quebec population that it's a good-willed people and they have a natural revulsion to centralized control. So a lot of these exercises will just create a lot of tension for nothing, because over the course of time, they'll have to dissolve. So yeah, and as I mentioned, it's not healthy for the population because we are now living in a global economy and many fields require English, particularly technical ones. And the government is shooting itself in the foot by limiting education choices, because global competitiveness is going to become more and more relevant now that the physical geography doesn't matter anymore. We're all connected, as we are here now, through just one cerebral internet. It's a cyber geography. There's physical space doesn't matter anymore. And for better or for worse, English is the dominant language in that context. So, and then not to mention limiting personal choices of our talented young citizens. If you've got a Francophone student who wants to go to an English CEGEP because they're going to study computer programming and it's all in English, and then they're not allowed to do that. So, well, I mean, the books will all be in English because the code is composed in that language, for better or for worse. So there just seems to be a lot of kind of social manipulation, and without really thinking about the long term. I'm trying to find a method to all this madness other than just power trip by a convenient populist majority, which will be short-lived if it continues, in my opinion. As for solutions, well, I think we should, stick with Bill 101 for another generation. I find that our community has reached to find a healthy balance. I myself have come to say, okay, maybe that is working out. Quebec Francophones, it's 1% of North America. We're not isolated on an island where it's like Japan, where it's easier to protect language and culture. There's a high exposure to the rest of Canada and to American culture through all the media products and advertising and the internet. But 101's, in my mind, is doing well. How come they're not providing evidence, solid evidence, otherwise? And why make such strict changes at this time? It's very opportunistic with the majority government to impose these things. But they got away with it with the Charter of Values, and this is what's next. Other solutions. Oh yeah, to encourage social tolerance. A lot of people make a concerted effort to learn French, and because it's not perfect, sometimes they're marginalized in the workplace or they don't have access to employment. We need to encourage a social tolerance, and with a nationalistic government, I find people are getting pickier about language. Even myself sometimes pretend they don't understand. I speak French all my life, but I have an Anglophone accent, obviously. So just a little nuances coming out of this kind of subtext of nationalism. And big solution, as was mentioned, and one of the positive aspects of the new law is it gives more access to French learning, which we should continue to encourage all citizens to improve their French as the common social and political language, so that they can continue to engage in an inclusive way in the society. And other things, we have to apply political pressure. This is a political issue. Legault has made it political, and he's infecting the social dynamics. Why are the Liberals not doing more? Are they afraid of losing votes? I don't know. Will another emergent party come and shake up the balance? We'll see. Anyway, I think this is a mistake. It's a mistake, and I hope that this law, that there's a mechanism that can be repealed once they realize it's a piece of crap. So let's see here. What else do I want to say? Yeah, I've held an elected position in Gatineau City from 2013. The fact that I'm an Anglophone has not been an issue. It's been the negativity that I've encountered has been by extremists. It's been nearly negligible. I'm actually in the process of leaving Aylmer for Point Gatineau, which is a very francophone place, and I've been campaigning there for the municipal elections in November 7th. And the fact that I'm an Anglophone, it's not an issue at all. In fact, people are really excited that, you know, it's not my first language, that I've made such efforts to maintain it. So another thing I wanted to mention was about the nationalism. It's a sensitive thing to talk about. But with the real estate market in Ottawa, you know, prices are bad here for rentals and purchases, but it's in Ottawa, it's more so. And there's been quite an influx of people crossing the river for the rental market for purchasing. And so the prices are going up because of the demand. And so people are also irked that things are getting more expensive, and they see a lot of Ontario plates. A lot of people don't get them changed within the 3 months they're supposed to. So that's a physical effect we see a lot in Aylmer, where there's Ontario plates like all over the place. So people kind of feel invaded. So that's kind of feeding into this the xenophobia a bit in some corners. So that's just an observation I thought I'd share. So Jean, I probably used up my time by now. Better stop me. I could go. I'm a politician. I could go on forever.
Thank you so much for your comments, Mike. And we'll go over to Maddie and her representing Y4Y Quebec.
Hey, thanks. Sorry about that. My Wi-Fi dropped out. I guess Videotron and Quebecor aren't fans of what we're talking about this evening. It's a joke. But basically, I'll keep it short and sweet. I'm president of Y4Y Quebec, which is a provincial nonprofit youth organization representing young English-speaking Quebecers aged 16 to 30 across the province. I'm also a law student at Université de Montréal. So I'm one of those people who sort of is very much involved in both worlds all the time in terms of linguistic. So I have a good, I think, holistic view and understanding of some of these issues. And I think it's really important for both communities to talk to each other, which that dialogue doesn't always seem to be happening. But that's a side note. Quick 3 elements I wanted to touch on tonight regarding the impacts this might have on youth. The first is sort of an overall perspective on Bill 96, from what I've been hearing from conversations and from consultations that Y4Y has done. The second one is about CEGEP, which is the hot topic regarding youth in Bill 96. And the last one is related to work and employment. So if we start with the overall, what we're seeing right now with youth in our consultations and in conversations is they're all kind of like, why now? We just came out of a global pandemic, you know, there's a lot of other issues that are super pressing, whether it be the environment, mental health, post-secondary education. And a lot of people are questioning why we have to go back and sort of revisit the social contract between linguistic communities at this specific moment. A lot of youth, some of them aren't aware of Bill 96, but it's talked about quite a bit, and most people I've talked to are at least somewhat familiar with it. It is a very large piece of legislation, having 200 articles. So sometimes that can be kind of hard for youth to digest. One of the things we've been trying to do is making it more accessible to them to begin with, so that they can understand what's in it, and then they can come back to us with some of their perspectives and opinions. Once sort of some of this has been digested, has been allowed to sit with them, one of the things that we've been hearing a lot is that there seems to be a huge discrepancy between what is in Bill 96 and what young English-speaking Quebecers believe to be their reality and their needs. So, I mean, my generations before that, we didn't go through the same linguistic strife as some of the older generations. We lived pretty much our whole lives under Bill 101 as we know it now. So a lot of us have a different relationship with language. And to a lot of us, Bill 96 seems to be returning to an old debate that we thought was over, and it doesn't necessarily build the kind of future that we would want to see between linguistic communities in Quebec. To me, it's a pretty divisive bill. It seems to be there to be divisive. And we're sort of at this place now, I think, where we would like to be building bridges between linguistic communities and not necessarily burning them. And this is the last part for the overall that I touched a little bit before. It's a very complex bill. And it's very difficult to grasp in full, which sometimes can be a tool to sort of dissuade youth from getting engaged in the conversation to begin with, because they feel they can't understand or that it sort of goes over their head. So it's been a huge obstacle in some cases in terms of getting youth opinions on the matter. So now 2 more specific things in Bill 96 that I want to touch on regarding youth. Obviously, the first one has been talked a lot about already tonight, so I'll keep it brief, is CEGEPs. This is the #1 thing in Bill 96. It sort of touches youth directly. As Kevin said, I believe we don't really know what the impacts will be. It's very hard to understand how the cap is going to work out. There's some confusion out there about what the cap on enrollment actually is. It's clear that it's a solution that's meant to address issues at John Abbott and Dawson, yet it's being applied across the CEGEP system, and it's going to have different impacts on different CEGEPs, whether it be Heritage or Abbott. They're not going to see the same results, most likely, if Bill 96 becomes law. Some of the concerns YFY has with the CEGEP issue that are sort of a little bit more in depth. Because of the English eligible concept, we're concerned this might create sort of a 2-tiered admission system at CEGEPs. It's not clear how that's going to go down in practice. So that's one of the questions we have. And CEGEPs are obviously an important places of exchange between linguistic communities. I mean, Bill 101 applies to high school and elementary school. CEGEPs are really one of the first chances you get if you're Bill 101 Anglo or historic Anglo to meet some other people, and vice versa if you're a Francophone who had to go to French school under Bill 101. 2 other quick things. They're also imposing the French exit exam to English CEGEPs, which is a concern if they don't also beef up the French classes. What we've heard is that might discourage a lot of young Anglophones from staying in the province because they feel that they would not be able to pass the French exit exam, either because of their current French abilities or because of the level of French that are taught in our CEGEPs. And the other thing that is not clear is the impact possibly on our score if we are leaning towards a sort of 2-tiered admission system where some Anglophones get in because they're English eligible, then they're competing against some of the crème de la crème from the Francophone system. Last but not least, the last thing I wanted to talk about is work. It's also been touched on. One of the huge issues that we face, and I know is faced in West Quebec as well, is the brain drain, where talented young Anglophones often hop across the border because they can get good jobs in the federal civil service, and their French is seen as an asset elsewhere. So one of the concerns is that a lot of the things in Bill 96 might increase that issue, along with the CEGEP issue to begin with, so they might work in tandem. The OQLF extended measures is one of the ones that I'm particularly concerned about, and what that means for employability for young Anglophones whose maybe French skills aren't up to par. If you're a business and there's now a whole new set of extended measures that they can use, that the OQLF can use, would you rather hire someone who you know is reliably bilingual, or give an Anglophone who maybe is trying to ameliorate their French skills a little bit the chance? If you know that there's a lot of sticks out there and not so many carrots, to me, it makes business sense to go with someone who you think is going to be reliable and who's not going to get you in trouble, which could be a huge problem for employment of young Anglophones in the future. It's also been mentioned, but Anglophone representation in the civil service has been at like 1% or lower since 1972. There's measures in Bill 96 that make the level of French even harder in the public service. And there's some measures that might touch universities as well. So right now, as an Anglophone who goes to Université de Montréal, I had the option to write my first year exams in English. There's a possibility that will be taken away with Bill 96, which might even discourage some Anglophones from going to French schools to begin with, which is kind of counterproductive if your whole point of this bill is to increase the French language skills of people and make them want to learn French. One good thing about Bill 96 potentially is the right to learn French. That's something that a lot of youth have been asking for a long time in the Anglophone English-speaking community, is better access to improve their French language skills to courses. Of course, this might be an issue in terms of what that actually looks like on the ground in practice, in terms of how these classes are accessible, how they're delivered, when they're delivered. For example, some universities already give French second language classes, but they're at like Friday 3 p.m., which no one wants to go to if you're a university student. The other issue too is French classes are great. It's great that everyone has the right to learn French. One of the issues that we know exists in West Quebec is internet access. If these classes are being delivered through an online platform, how are we going to ensure that rural English-speaking Quebecers are going to be able to access them at all to begin with? On Y for Y's end, something we would like to see in terms of linguistic policy is the emphasis on the promotion. We do a lot of bridge building between communities, and we work a lot trying to make young English-speaking Quebecers feel like they belong in Quebec, and a lot of the times that can be a linguistic barrier. So the idea that their French is not good enough, which is also referred to as linguistic insecurity. So to us, the logical thing, if you are truly trying to promote the French language, would be to make it more incentives-based rather than sticks-based, and also to engage mostly in consultation with non-French speakers. At the end of the day, if you're trying to promote the French language, well, it's those who don't speak French that have to be convinced. And what we've seen is not necessarily that kind of consultation extended to non-native French speakers. I think that is all I had. I'm also here to listen to you guys and what you have to say. So thank you very much for your time.
Thank you so much, Maddie. So at this time, what we'll do is we will start off the question and answer period. We're doing very well on time. So we'll have a few questions. My colleague Haley will pose a few questions that were submitted in advance during the time of registration. And what we'll allow people to do is to talk about, to respond between Maddie, Mike, and Kevin. If we have a good answer, we'll let them, if they have a good answer, they can respond. And if there's something that is we're not able to speak to, we'll capture that question and try to get back to the group with a response. So I'll go ahead and turn over the microphone to Haley Campbell.
Hey, thank you. Good evening, everyone. So the first question is a bit of a grouped question that was submitted by Elizabeth R. and Allison C. So the question is, how will Bill 96 affect the communications of nonprofit organizations that serve the English-speaking community? For example, service organizations like the Rotary Club, or community organizations like the RAWQ, or even churches or fraternal organizations. So I'll open the floor to you three.
I'm going to be very, very cautious answering that, but it's my hope that it doesn't. I believe that the same rules apply whether it's for profit, not profit, and that's whether the employer, an employer can be in a volunteer organization, I think, under the terms of the bill. But again, I'm hesitant because I'm not 100% certain. But I think it comes down to the 25 employees. There was originally 50. But that's as far as the Frenchization or language in the workplace and those obligations. But there's always an obligation to deliver services in French. Now, under the current bill, I don't think that changes under Bill 96, regardless of whether it's a volunteer organization or not a volunteer organization. That capacity has to be there, and I don't think that's changed by Bill 96.
Okay, thank you, Kevin. Maddie or Mike, would you like to take a moment and respond as well?
Well, I was just going to say I have no idea, but don't show that question to Legault's regime, or they might modify Bill 96 to make it stricter.
I mean, my inclination, yeah, might be that there might be exceptions for volunteer organizations, but again, I'm hesitant to answer with the solid "don't worry about it" or worry, because to be quite honest, I'm not quite sure. I'd have to check.
Okay, thank you for that.
It's a good question.
Yes, I think so as well. Okay, so we'll move on to the next one. Will English-speaking Quebecers be able to receive services in English in retirement residences, nursing homes, and hospitals under Bill 96?
this is a serious concern under this bill. As you know, we have no designated. We're not in a designated area, despite being the second largest English population in Quebec, and one of the only English populations growing. Mike spoke to some of the reasons for that, but we are not. The hospitals here are not designated. There's a difference between designated and non-designated. It doesn't mean there's not services. It just means in the health services area that there's no guaranteed right to those services. So it's a concern. And if you add that with measures that limit the ability to hire people on the basis that they're bilingual, or and you add measures of protection for people that make complaints for l'office de la langue française, for example, if they feel there's too much English being spoken in the workplace, the combination of these factors, and again, I go back to the English eligible concept in the delivery of services. So the combination of these factors is a concern in the area of healthcare and retirement. It remains to be seen how it's going to spell out.
Thank you for that. Another question, perhaps we can change it up a little bit and also hear if Maddie, if you've heard from any international students as well and what their thoughts are. But just the general question was, how will international students in Quebec be affected by Bill 96?
I'll go first, and then Kevin or Mike can jump in. So this is one of those. So this is the thing. When I'm pretty convinced that when provincial governments pass legislation, they don't at all think about people who they don't deem to be historic Anglos or Bill 101 Anglos. So there's a bunch of potential possible impacts on international students, but it was not written with them in mind, so it's not entirely clear. One of the ones that I've heard from international students that we've consulted with is definitely the employment factor. It's definitely whether or not Quebec and Montreal is still going to be an attractive place to come study, and what their employment prospects look like, especially with the expanded OQLF powers. We saw it when Journal de Montréal did their whole thing where they went and tried to get French service in downtown Montreal. That pretty much, I mean, it was sous-entendu there. It wasn't explicitly against international students, but it was clear that they were visiting establishments where it was mostly international students that were employed. So there's definitely concerns on the employment side. One of the other things that maybe Kevin mentioned was that new arrivals to Quebec will only be allowed to receive communications from the Quebec government in English for 6 months, and then they'll have to switch to French. I believe it used to be a year, but that's changed now. I'm not sure how that applies to international students though, because there's some weird status requirements there, but I don't know if Kevin or Mike wants to jump in. You're on mute, Kevin.
Sorry, I didn't catch the last bit of that question. I was answering one of the questions in the chat. But do you mind repeating it for me? I'm not sure.
Impacts on international students. I'm not sure. Communications between the government and international students. I'm not sure what the impact of Bill 96 is on that. I don't know if you have any more insight on that.
Yeah, I don't know the specifics of that either. I really can't say. And this government has done a lot with international students in a negative way. I know they dislike the fact that the majority of international students attend English universities. So I wouldn't be surprised if, they've spoken about it openly as problematic. So I wouldn't be surprised if it does be affected, but I can't say for sure. I don't see it in the wording of the bill as it stands.
Just like to make a comment. On a positive note, though, opening up Bill 101 and making these extra measures in Bill 96 seems like an aggressive measure. The apparently the PQ was criticizing it doesn't go far enough. So some see this as a kind of a moderate measure, which it tweaks a few things. And so, I mean, remain positive that perhaps it could have been more extreme. Luckily, the PQ has probably no chance of forming government for the foreseeable future, though anything can happen in Quebec politics. Thank you.
Okay, thank
All
you very
right.
much. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Go ahead,
Jean.
Haley. No, I turn it over to you.
Okay, well, I just wanted to thank you for your responses to these questions that were initially submitted. And I know that we have a lot of others on the phone that would like to ask a few questions as well. So perhaps we'll open up the floor now. So if you have a question, you're welcome to raise your hand, or perhaps we could surf through some of the comments in the chat as well and ask you to unmute yourself. Okay, I see that Arthur, you're welcome to unmute yourself and ask your question.
Okay, pardon me. I'm trying to put down my hand here. Hold on. Lower hand. There we go. Pardon me. Maybe an easy one. I have a very technical one for Kevin. But what do either three of you make of the lack of what I will call a fully fledged bilingual education system in the public French system? What do you make of that? I've always found I have my kids in the English language system because they have French immersion. I wanted them to learn both. I had the choice because I went to elementary school in English, but I couldn't. In the French system, it's French only. Passable English only. The kids come out, of elementary school speaking barely anything. What do either or three of you make of that setup?
Sorry, the lack of it, like a similar immersion program in the French.
Yes, or what we could call a fully or at least ostensibly bilingual program. It's either French immersion in the English system or French only. It just seems to me striking that in Gatineau, in Quebec, and Montreal, there are no places where you can send your kids to school, i.e., elementary, junior high, high school, in a fully, at least bilingual.
I agree with you, and that would be, as a parent, my ultimate choice as well. And the only place that could happen would be under the English school board system.
Yeah.
Even the amount of hours in teaching English in the French system is limited. It's so highly regulated and controlled that and again, part of the purpose of Bill 101 was, and I would argue one of the working elements is that immigrations are sent to French school. So it only works, what you're proposing could only work under the English system. And I think that there's probably a lot of English schools that strive to obtain that. I know at Hadley, there is the advanced French program. But again, it's limited to a certain number of students and they must attain a certain average. So it would be nice to see programs like that, I feel, expanded to a larger group of students and not necessarily be based strictly on academics. I'm sure this creates a lot of challenges, but I understand your question completely. And I was one of the generations where our parents, having lived through 2 referendums and going to school in the early 80s, our parents were one of the few families in our area to send me and my brothers and sisters to a French school. There was only 1 or 2 other families at the time doing that. And that's how we became bilingual, and that's how they saw the option. And this was before immersion had become widespread within the English system. So, I mean, the hope is that now that we have this immersion system, that it'll continue to develop into perhaps a fully bilingual system.
One thing I noticed, having had children in the elementary school system since 2002, 2003, that when the year at which English starts in the French school system, all my children through the French system, it depends on who's in government. When the Liberals in power, they'll introduce English in grade 1 or 2. Then the PQ gets in power, they raise it to grade 4. It's so completely political, and they're always improvising and changing things. It's kind of confusing. But again, as I mentioned earlier, global competitivity, like it or not, English is the language of the world, of trade, it's the language of the academia, it's the language of the internet. So protecting French is important, as is protecting Polish in Poland and Japanese in Japan. It's just, do we have a healthy balance is the big discussion. And I think that when Bill 96 comes along, it shakes people up because it's an authoritarian nationalistic measure. We have to see how it goes. But the next government's probably going to do something that's a little bit different, and hopefully we'll tweak it so that we have a good balance where we're all bilingual and French doesn't feel threatened, and the politicians don't use it as an excuse to put authoritarian measure on its population, because what I can tell, the French language is doing it is as good as it's ever done in Quebec. However, in the rest of Canada, there are issues, but we're not here for that. Thanks.
The only thing is, isn't that how we ended up here in the first place? Like, isn't that how we ended up with the clauses on Statutes to begin with? The idea that there's not great English education in the French system. That's why we have such high demand for admissions, schools, and the English system. So, I mean, that's one of the things. We're being presented as if the admissions issue at John Abbott and Dawson is a linguistic one, when it's not entirely a linguistic one. And there's plenty of other measures that could be put in place that would sort of have the same impact, instead of a cap on enrollment and not letting people choose their institution of choice. And one of them would be to improve the English education in primary and secondary schools in the French system, in my opinion.
Thank you all. Then the next hand that I see up is Nicole Fleury. So if you're welcome to unmute yourself and ask your question.
Hello, everyone. I would like to elaborate more on the education of like the French schools and all that. I've seen it through myself, like family members who went to French school, like my brother's children. He went to a French school and so did his girlfriend. And when they tried to send their son to an English school, they were denied. There's like learning disabilities in our families, and so therefore he was denied going to school in English, and so then after that he drops out. So there's a lot of like even Legault, Mr. Legault said that with French learning disabilities and all that, with French people with learning disabilities, he might have considered sending them to an English school, but nothing's happening about that or anything like that. So it's like, this is the thing where the government should actually realize, saying, well, geez, it's like if we are able to help these kids pass and get good grades and all that, they can get a good job, and you don't lose your French language as well, when you do take an English school, so you're just learning to become more bilingual. So that's pretty well what I wanted to say. It's not really a question. And I did put other questions in there where, in the chat, where it says really for like a child who went to a parent who decides, okay, I'm going to send my child to a French school, they're English parents. And if later on down the line, when that child goes through elementary and high school in French, will they be able to have English services in English if they choose from, or will that be considered null and void because they went to a French school?
That's a great question, Nicole. Thank you for posing that. Did you want to direct it to somebody in particular or to all three?
Well, whoever thinks that could answer it would be much appreciated.
Okay, thank you.
As far as the last bit of your question, if you have the right, so you have a certificate, which the way it works in Quebec for education or access to English school, if you have a certificate of eligibility, which means you're charter, you're a right holder to go to English school, and you attend a French school, there's in the current Bill 101, and I don't think this is changed by Bill 96, but there's a provision that says it's assumed you went to English school so that your right is transferred to your children. And that is to encourage, in fact, Anglophones, like, even though they're right holders, to attend French school and improve their French skills. So there's no danger on losing the right. As long as you obtain your certificate eligibility, you can attend a French school, and not, your children won't lose their right under the charter.
But also too, what I was trying to say is that if you're an English parent sending a child to a French school, that child will actually lose their rights to send their children to an English school.
No, that's what I'm saying. That's not the case.
Okay.
Law provides that if you obtain a certificate of eligibility to go to English school and you send your children to the French school, then it's presumed, even though you went to French school, that you went to English school as far as the transfer of your right is concerned to your children.
But that didn't happen. Oh yeah, my brother went to a French school, but then he wasn't allowed to send his child to an English school because he went to a French school. But my mom went.
If he had a certificate of eligibility,
Yeah.
even though he went to French school, like for example, I went to French school in grade school, I still have the right to send my children to English school because my parents obtained a certificate of eligibility before sending me to French school.
Okay. Well, back in the 80s, that wasn't the case. I guess that was
Okay.
before 1988.
Okay, thank you very much for your question, Nicole. Just, we do have quite a few others on the line that would like to ask questions as well. So if you don't mind, we'll move on. And I just ask that other questions be concise, and if you don't mind directing them to, you know, either of the three individuals that we have on the line with us this evening, that would be great. So the next hand that is raised is Brian RAWQ. I'll ask that you can unmute yourself now.
You're on mute, Brian.
Sorry about that. Léger and Léger, the polling company, in June did a poll on how people would vote in a third referendum. And the results were very encouraging for Anglophones and Allophones, because the result was that less than 33% would vote yes. And the younger you were, the more likely you were to vote no. In fact, the closest they got to 50% were people who were 65 and over, who had voted in the first two referendums. And I know some pundits are looking at the amendments to 90Q1 and 90Q2 is considered backdoor separatism. And very disappointing that the members of parliament in this region voted for the Bloc Québécois motion that called for support for 90Q1 and 90Q2. I would wonder if any of the panelists would like to comment on that.
Well, I mean, I think this speaks to what Mike was talking about, and that's the, you know, the brand. It speaks to the popularity of the CQ and why they're getting away with things like Bill 21 and Bill 96. Is they've found this this formula of that seems to speak to the Quebec of the day, which is like nationalist federalist. It used to be federalists versus nationalists, and you know, they've kind of found this middle position, and are extremely popular with it, and are you know, drunk on their popularity. They got away with it under Bill 21. Hey, let's try it again. You know, Bill 21 is extremely popular amongst the majority of Quebec's population. They see it as a complete success, and part of it is I don't think they understand it. And you know, the problem we're seeing with Bill 96 and its complexity, and you know, you say you're against Bill 96. And it's like, well, don't you think the French language needs protection? Of course, I think the French language needs protection. I believe strongly in the French fact of Quebec, and I wouldn't want that to change. But, you know, and that speaks to the fact that people don't know what is in this bill and what it means, and just how far it goes. It's you know, I don't think the majority of politicians that we've met in Quebec even have read the contents of the bill. So how is the media expected to communicate it to people, and how are people supposed to be informed about what its contents are to make an informed judgment? It's you know, it's a little cynical, but it's the nature of the politics of the day.
Okay, thank you. The next hand that is raised is Laureen Beaton. So you're welcome to unmute yourself, and I'll lower your hand. There we go.
Hey, hello, everybody. Yeah, I actually have read quite a few sections of this bill because as a citizen, I'm very concerned about this. And I guess the thing that kind of blows my mind about it the most, you know, I'm retired now, and I've worked all my life in Quebec. I've worked in French and English, worked in education, worked in French schools, spoke French fluently, worked in English schools, no problem. What I find difficult to comprehend is that with the use of this notwithstanding clause, that both the provincial government and what seems to be our federal representatives as well seem to feel that this is perfectly okay, and that this cancels out our individual rights and freedoms. It means that I can't contest this. I cannot go to court and protest this law. If I'm understanding this right, is that the case? I guess Kevin would be the one to answer that.
In a nutshell, yes. You know, there are how do I put it? There are ways, not easy. I'm thinking about Bill 21. And again, you know, the notwithstanding clause is often, you know, only applies to certain rights. The majority of them, but for example, it doesn't apply to Section 23 of the Canadian Charters and Rights of Freedom, which is the guarantee to minority language education, right? So you have the right to be educated in Quebec in English and in French outside of Quebec with certain criteria. Now that includes, the Supreme Court has always said that includes certain rights of control and management, you know, so that the majority can't tell you how to teach your culture, in other words. And so QESBA, the Quebec English School Board Association, very creatively with their lawyers used this to attack Bill 21 or its application to the English language school system, and won. So Bill 21 does not apply to the English language school system.
Yeah.
So you know, they're a very limited and narrow victory, but rights are rights, and people will find a way. But you're right. I mean, it still applies to the rest of Canadian society. You know, but there are creative ways, and I use that example just to give maybe a glimmer of hope. But you're essentially right. That it's a barrier to challenging the law.
Okay, I wonder though, can we not preemptively actually go to court over this issue before they pass the bill?
It's not law yet.
No.
And some laws don't become law. So I don't think the issue has crystallized yet.
Well, I'm pretty sure this will become law because Legault has actually stated that he has no intentions of making any amendments to this bill. So
I think you're right. No, I don't think there's any chance in hell that this doesn't become law. I'd be surprised if they even amend anything in committee.
Okay, Thank you very much. We'll move over to Chris. He has his hand raised.
First, I have a comment. I've noticed the economy of Quebec go down in the past, well, since 1970s. It's been continuously going down slightly. We've seen a lot of our emergency rooms being closed for several days because they couldn't get nurses and doctors. We've seen the school system couldn't find teachers because they get paid more or just across the river or in some other province or in some other country. That's been like a real brain drain for Quebec. That bothers me. And in our own county, I'm sure it's the same in other areas too, but in our own county, we've seen businesses leave here or not come because it's easier to do business in Ontario. There's less restrictions and they're moving over there because quite often they're on the international market and they have to be working in English if they want to compete on the international market. If they're in Quebec, they're required by law to operate in French. So it becomes a real pain in the ass to do business in Quebec. So they're just not moving here. They're building in Ontario. That's just a comment. The other thing or question that I have is on the old age homes or the retirement homes, whether private or whether they're public, if they have more than 25 employees, do they have to operate totally in French, even if it's a totally English home?
Sorry, the requirement in business for the 25 and more, which used to be 50 and more, is you have to have a Francization program within your business, which means you have to take a number of measures to try to ensure that the language of work is the French language. So you have to have a Francization committee, you have to have a Francization plan. Like it's a lot. It's more of a red tape or administrative burden than anything else, and that's part of what you talk about when business is moving because of the hassle of operating in Quebec. I think that would be a big part of it. Now, my concern for nursing homes isn't so much the 25 or 50 having a franchisation program. It's the limitations on the being able to hire bilingual people unless you can justify it, or in public institutions, of whether or not these are designated institutions that you have the right to obtain language from, or it's the moving away from, okay, well, we're going to make sure there's a capacity to offer these services because, well, healthcare shouldn't be, I mean, even it used to be that healthcare was taken out of this game, right? That this aspect of society that is used for integration, and with this government, it's been brought back into the fold. I mean, even in 1977, healthcare was excluded. I remember it was stated that you don't need to pass a language test to receive, if you're sick and dying, to receive healthcare. And it shouldn't be used. Healthcare should not. It should be a right that belongs to everyone, regardless of what language you speak. But again, what concerns me most about retirement homes or healthcare or any kind of a rehabilitation center is this notion of English eligible. And what it comes down to is and I go back to the original statement I made, that this isn't about us. They think that the historical Anglo community, however you want to define it, has their services and will always have their services. Now, I see questions popping up in the chat as, am I a historical Anglo? Who the hell knows? Am I a historical Anglo? And that's the exact problem, right? I can't tell you if you're an historical Anglo, if the cutoff date is 1975, or if it's, you're able to trace 3 generations away from Wolf. No one knows what it means. And that's the problem. So it's this English eligible creeping in to services and healthcare and public administration. That is like, do we have to carry a passport saying that we're English eligible? So it's a scary introduction of something that was used for English school eligibility that is being expanded into other areas.
Thank you.
So I don't know how everybody feels, but I know that there are more questions, and I know we've gone over 8:30. If our panel would, and our presenter, Mr. Kevin Shaar, would like to stay, and if anybody would like to stay and continue to ask questions, I'll allow the discussion to continue till 9. I think that we've had a healthy, there hasn't been any pauses. I think people are still curious and have questions. If our panel doesn't have anywhere to be and can stay with us, we'd appreciate it. But I would be happy to allow this discussion to continue till 9 if everybody is amenable to that idea. Does that sound all right?
Do you mind if we cut it off at 8:45? I've got to
Sure.
post.
Sure. That gives us time for one more
Yeah.
question.
Okay, so I see that Nicole Fleury's hand has been raised, so perhaps I'll let you go first. And if you don't mind keeping it concise, that would be great.
Hi, I think I don't know if Kevin, you would be the one, or if would be Brian, but I'd like to know what is being done before this comes into law, and what actions can the community do other than being scared by all this and knowing the problems that it's going to bring to our society.
I think I'm gonna let Mike tackle this one first, but I will mention that you can go to the QCGN website. There is information on the measures of opposition that we're trying to launch. I mean, we've already been doing obviously a lot of lobbying and stuff to try to garnish support against the bill. We're going to be holding public hearings, which is the next step, because we don't feel that the government is going to accurately reflect opposition to the bill. So we're going to hold our own public hearings. And in order to prepare our own opposition to the bill, we're asking for public input. So I encourage you to visit the QCGN site. But Mike, I think would have a good contribution to answer your question as well.
Nicole, I was scrambling through the 100 pages there, the French law. Could you repeat your question?
I mean, this intervention is great, and thank you, by the way, RAWQ. But it does put the scare into everyone, because losing all the essential rights for medical and being in the CEGEP sector, I see definitely areas that will be impacted greatly, as you spoke about.
Enrollment, the CEGEP.
Yeah, but really, I'd like to find out what is being done and what can people do, and what are the next steps, because obviously from what's said, once it becomes law, it's too late.
It makes me
if
wonder.
I could just answer Nicole's, she sort of mentioned my name. Kevin is correct. Bill 96 cannot be challenged in courts until it becomes Law 96. And it is anticipated that the three opposition parties have amendments, and the CAC government will lose patience when it's time for the Christmas break around December 15th. So that if they haven't finished the clause by clause study of the law, they're going to go to Le Bayon closure. Of course, once Bill 96 becomes Law 96, the court challenges program of the federal government, I know of two groups that will be applying for funds. And of course, the committee will decide if there can be two challenges to Bill Law 96, or they may very well suggest that the two groups cooperate in their challenge. But you can expect a challenge to Law 96 in the new year.
Thank you.
And like I said earlier, it's a political question. every new regime has its own flavor it wants to spray on us for the language balance. So write your MLA. Mr. Fortin couldn't be here today. There's another emergent party that's a kind of a pro-freedom party. It's the Conservative Party of Quebec. Eric Duhem is looking for things to bring to the media and blast Legault. So there's an opportunity to bring attention to it through that. I'm going to send Mr. Duhem a message. I met him a couple of weeks ago. He's just looking for fights. But it surprises me. It's natural that the Anglophone community mobilizes quickly with the Charter of Values or language laws because, you know, we're the more sensitive ones, and we've got the critical mass of smart people like Brian who are monitoring things and ready to mobilize. But I wonder, like, this affects the Francophone community more. Are any of them mobilizing? Is there any entity within the Francophone community that's academia or parents' rights groups? That's something I got to kind of put out my feelers and try to find out what's going on there, because we need allies to do this.
QCGN's been working really hard on trying to establish those allies. You know, we've been reaching out to you know, different Francophone groups, business groups that are affected by this, cultural groups. You know, that there are still some, you know, reasonable Quebecers out there that don't think that notwithstanding clause is necessary or should be used. We're trying, but like I said, there's something sinister about the complicatedness of this bill that it's hard to communicate about, and just what its impact is, without trying to sound alarmist. You know, because yeah, just that it's a challenge.
And a slippery slope.
Kevin, at the end of May,
to this, what's next?
Right. Okay.
At the end of May,
we're running very tight on time, so I'm sorry to interrupt, Brian. We just have two final questions. I'm going to ask that you keep them very brief and the responses brief as well. Please direct them to one of the three speakers that we have. So Arthur, my apologies, I skipped over you last time, so please unmute yourself and ask your question. And then next up, we will have Chris, and that will be all. Thank you.
So thank you. I apologize. I wanted to sort of leave the room for everybody else. It's a very technical question for Kevin, which I'll ask quickly and maybe explain. Is I thought that you could still litigate for declaratory relief on the notwithstanding clause. I can explain that try to explain that to people, but that was always my learning of it. There's an article which I can forward to by some law professors. It came out in the Post a few weeks ago. They said you can still basically, so just for everybody's benefit to try to summarize, you can still sue if you basically their law is applied against you and you think that there's an unjustifiable violation, just like you would, you know, in a normal time. But when you get up to whatever level of court it ends up at, all the court can do is declare the violation, you know, invalid. The law still continues to apply. So it doesn't have teeth, but you can just get a declaratory relief, and then 5 years later down the road, there's some support for that. That's what I always thought. So it's kind of like you can still sue, but there's just for declaratory. Is that incorrect?
I mean, I'm learning something here, but that makes perfect sense to me because
I'll put the article.
Yeah, I would. I mean, that would be great. But like I said, I mean, usually it's being done backwards now, right? It's been done preemptively. So that's why that makes sense to me, because usually you would have a violation. Right. So then you would have a court establish the violation and make
invalid and null in law.
Then you would invoke the notwithstanding clause so that the court order wouldn't apply. Now that they're doing it preactively, that makes perfect sense to me, because you would still arrive at the right result, and that is the political consequences of not using the withstanding clause. So the recognition in society that this is being done in violation of a person's right.
Yeah, embarrass the government. Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, it's a debate, folks. I'll flip the article if people are interested. Yeah.
I would like to see it.
Thank you. So now, Chris, you're welcome to unmute yourself.
You talking to me?
Yes.
Sorry about that.
Oh, that's okay. Wait, did you have a question, Chris, or no?
Yeah, just one question.
Okay.
That has to do with the actual education of the people about Bill 96 and Bill 21. Very, very, very few people understand implications of either one, especially on the Francophone side. They know absolutely nothing about it. They know that it's going to protect the French language. Other than that, they have no idea what the consequences are. Our project should be to trying to educate the people. I think that's very, very important.
Yes, I agree with you, Chris. It's hard enough educating our own community. And then like Kevin said, QCGN is doing a lot of groundwork to try to reach across the aisle and bring in French Francophone support, or at least convey our concerns. So that work will continue. Chris will be our very last question tonight, but what I can assure you is that RAWQ is going to be contributing to QCGN's Bill 96 presentation and consultation process, and that we're here to listen to comments and concerns that the community has. This is just one method, this community information session we held tonight. What we would like to do is do another, either whatever the COVID situation allows us to do, is do another session, most likely in the Wakefield area, but we're looking more in the October-November timeframe. Once perhaps there is more information out there, that public consultations will be held in September. You can go to the National Assembly website to see the progression of the bill. And in our follow-up email, we'll also provide all of the registrants, the full some information regarding what they can do to learn more and to contact their representative and to participate in QCGN's campaign to gain more responses and feedback. Thank you everyone for participating tonight, and I hope that you stay in touch with us. Let us know what your feelings are and we'll let you know how to get in contact and voice them. But like I said, we hope to be able to replicate this event. We hope in person in the Wakefield area in the near future, before the end of the year. So thank you all very much for your support tonight, and we really appreciate your participation. Special thanks to my presenter. We put you on the spot and you did a wonderful job, and our panelists. Thank you, Mike Duggan and Maddie Lawler. Have a good evening, and we appreciate your support for this event.
The article's not downloading.
Oh,
We
no.
can make that available to you in the follow-up email.
I shared the link to the on National Post site in the chat too, so you can click on the link to the National Post.
The link works.
Thank you.
What we'll do is we'll stay online for a little bit to allow the chat to remain up, and then we'll also make sure that we capture some of these methods and responses in our follow-up email. So you don't have to, if you would like to look over the chat, we'll leave it up for a few more minutes. Haley and I will keep the video up, and for those that need to go, it'll be it's fine, but